so many things to ask you, Bucky, that you have foreseen. Thinking of your geodesic dome, do you see actually roofed cities ever?
We're continually doing more with less, and my geodesic domes do a very great deal with very little. But I think they're only symptomatic studs, and I wouldn't be surprised if we found ways to control that environment over the city without even seeing the roof there. There'd be an electrical field control, and so we could make the water go and dump over here and pipe it there and so forth, whatever it may be. An electrical field control, an electrical field control.
So recently I had the pleasure of having a conversation with a fellow researcher that I've been following for some time, and we had a great conversation talking about all kinds of things. And one of the things that was mentioned that she shared with me was the topic of C60, otherwise known as carbon 60, which is this alleged supplement that a lot of people are taking nowadays because of a host of claimed health benefits. And of course, it's presented as being natural and an alternative to toxic pharmaceuticals and all these things. But when you really start looking into it, this gets pretty crazy. So to delve into this, I'm going to start by playing some clips, kind of giving you their basic sales pitch from a few different sources, and you can hear what they're saying about the alleged natural origins of this molecule and the supposed science behind it, and then move into some of the more paranormal or what are essentially spiritual implications of this substance and the way it's being branded and sold to people, particularly within the truth movement in a lot of ways. So if you're not familiar with this yet, hopefully this gives you a little taste of what we're talking about here.
Well, carbon-60 is a carbon molecule. It's 60 carbon atoms and it's shaped exactly like a soccer ball, about 1.1 nanometers in size. And in nature, its main production comes from, it's made in the atmosphere of giant red stars, and then it's blown out into space. So it's found in the area between space, and it's also created by meteoric impacts. But it's also created in other combustion situations. For instance, the black wick on the end of your candle is about 1/4% carbon-60. Of course, getting that 1/4% out into a highly concentrated form is another thing. So it's found in nature. It's just not very common or concentrated. There's a few natural products you can find carbon-60 in. Shungite. Shungite is a mineral. It's basically an algae coal from 2.9 billion years ago in Siberia. And it was laid down during the late bombardment when a lot of meteorites were hitting the Earth. Jupiter and Saturn's orbits were readjusting themselves, and it set a lot of bodies in the asteroid belt careening through the inner system, and they smacked into the Earth and the Moon and elsewhere. And so those meteoritic impacts made large amounts of carbon-60, and then basically the blue-green algae picked up the carbon-60, using it as a radiant protection. And then their bodies fell to the bottom of the lake and basically became an algae coal. And the Russians have been using shungite for centuries as a healing product. Shungite's only 1 or 2% pure carbon-60. Of course, now with modern technology, you can get it. Our carbon-60 is 99.95% pure. So it's a lot more concentrated, and it has a lot more benefit in that case.
What are people reporting about carbon-60 olive oil? They are saying that is improving their sleep and enhancing their sleep, an increase in mental clarity, more energy, better motivation and increased concentration, a stronger mind-body connection, feeling calmer, a reduction in stress, higher libido, faster recovery of the skin after sunburn, faster hair growth. Athletes are reporting very significant effects. They're able to lift heavier weights, but sometimes to the point of causing tendon injury. They're able to do more reps with the same weight, an increase in stamina and endurance, running and cycling faster, and running and cycling longer, and shorter post-training recovery.
We mix conscious energy with electromagnetic field generation, and we're able to convince any living organism, we'll convince bugs that it's better to live in the pasture next door than in this pasture. We're in San Antonio, Texas, and we move crickets out of a commercial establishment, and we convince the crickets that there's more hospitable environment across the road than what they're being subjected to, and they literally moved across the street.
I've really had an epiphany that pharmaceuticals are mostly evil. You know, they take care of the one problem that someone is taking that pharmaceutical for, but it can create 50 other ones that they never tell you about.
We use consciousness to, you know, Dr. Loretta that'll be coming on is a trained remote viewer. So when you remote view, you are looking into the plane of consciousness at a given spot, whether it's past, present, or future. So consciousness doesn't realize past, present, or future. Right. You presented a question, and the answer is the answer if you know how to get the answer out of it. And that's what we're working with.
Now, how does C60 elevate consciousness?
Well,
for one, I can say personally, it's increased my psychic abilities. I am more sensitive. I am more telepathic. There's a whole lot of opening up of the pineal gland, and I'm responsive to it. I'm noticing it more than I've ever noticed before. So I know that's one of the factors. In fact, that's even reported in some of the research. So frequencies and vibration come into play. So what we identify as a frequency that they're operating on, and either influence that frequency, change it, or make it objectionable to have where they are, so they don't feel comfortable and they move on, and then you can direct that moving on. Again, frequency and vibrational energy is where we're working with.
Do you see humans being manipulated in that way?
They can.
Yes.
They can.
Do you see it happening? And now that you know that you can do it, do you see it kind of happening, going, wait a minute, they're doing something is doing this to us?
It seems that the government finds ways of weaponizing any technology, but we don't go there.
So those last few clips were from a longer interview. Those are just a few of these two scientists, quote unquote, who were regulars on the Sarah Westall YouTube channel. And they're all about consciousness research. Big surprise. And so, on the one hand, I know it's probably easy to just dismiss them as a couple of quacks, and I'd be lying if especially the one guy didn't remind me of a particular Randy Quaid character from National Lampoons.
You know that metal plate in my head?
How can I forget?
I had to have it replaced because every time Catherine revved up the microwave, I'd piss my pants and forget who I was for a half hour or so.
But all joking aside, when you really stop and look into what fullerenes are, specifically this C60 molecule that is made from carbon, and when carbon is put together in such a way, it makes graphene, and graphene is indeed a conductive substance.
Graphene is a single layer of graphite. This means that graphene is only one atom thick. Graphene was only isolated in 2004. Let's look at the properties of graphene. Graphene is an excellent conductor of electricity, and that's because graphene has delocalized electrons just like graphite. In the future, graphene will be useful in electronics. Secondly, graphene is extremely strong, and that will make it useful for new materials. Okay, let's look now at fullerenes. Fullerenes are molecules of carbon atoms with hollow shapes. Usually fullerenes have hexagonal rings of carbon atoms, but they can also have rings with 5 or 7 carbon atoms. The first fullerene molecule to be discovered is called Buckminster fullerene, and I'm showing you a picture of this molecule here. Buckminster fullerene contains 60 carbon atoms arranged in a hollow sphere. The carbon atoms form rings with either 6 carbon atoms like this one, or with 5 carbon atoms like this one. Fullerenes such as this have a number of uses. They can be used to deliver pharmaceuticals into the body. They can be used as lubricants, for example in machines, to stop moving parts from grinding together. And finally, they can be used as catalysts to speed up chemical reactions.
So when it's either flat or folded into a Buckminster Fuller like geodesic form, and of course Buckminster Fuller is a topic in and of itself that probably warrants its own video, which I'm probably going to do pretty soon, or whether it's in the form of nanotubes, carbon nanotubes, that in all these instances it has conductive properties for electromagnetic frequencies. You can make microchips out of it, they have, and when you mention carbon nanotubes, perhaps some of you are familiar with claims by a certain doctor. If you're familiar with L.A. Marzulli and all the material he's put out on UFO abductee claims, who talk about having implants taken out of them that are essentially carbon nanotubes that would be conductive, like little microchips. Suddenly, you have to stop and acknowledge that perhaps there is something actually going on here, that this is more than just, snake oil salesmen. I mean, they are, in the sense that the entire spiritual worldview that they are approaching all of this quote-unquote research from is, once again, the same old occult consciousness perspective. They talk about consciousness and frequencies, and the guy on the right is talking about his psychic ability being increased and opening his third eye, and they're talking about communicating with animals, and you name it. So the idea that electromagnetic frequencies, that if by ingesting these particles, these nanoparticles, these fullerenes, these carbon 60 buckyballs, as some people call them, referring to Buckminster Fuller again, I have to say that it's really not that much of a stretch that by ingesting these things, and they just get absorbed into your cellular walls and just kind of build up in your whole system, that they would in fact increase the conductivity of your body and your nervous system and essentially amplify the antenna, right? Making you more sensitive to electromagnetic frequencies. And when you think about that in light of many of the things that I touched upon in a lot of my research in the past, and particularly in the documentary Ethereal that I did, talking about electromagnetism and how it does very much seem like there is a spiritual element to electromagnetism, whether it's in the heavens and the luminaries and on that level, and then on down to our own bodies and the whole mind-body interface, which of course is what the whole consciousness research field, quote unquote, is all about. It's really nothing more than all the old New Age practices and beliefs now being discussed in this sort of sterilized laboratory, quote unquote, scientific approach to the same questions that mysticism has always been fixated with. The mind-body connection, what is consciousness, how do we expand our consciousness, how do we connect with the grand consciousness? And in this clip here, he just blatantly comes right out and and says this.
And let's say let's take this out of the medical realm, and let's just say when you think, when I ask you to tell me what was your favorite age between 5 and 7, and or favorite day, your best friend, and you start thinking, you're communicating with consciousness, because your data bank, the information that you have in storage for mass memories, is in the cloud. It's not on your brain. And so you're communicating with the information, just like getting on your phone and looking at the internet. You're communicating with the cloud, receiving information.
Universal consciousness.
So if you take the C60 and it increases the amplitude or the antenna capability or communication, let's say it increases your data speed transfer of like a phone, instead of being 3G, it's 4G or 5G. What if this, because of its conductive ability, allows you to increase your communication between you and the source, whatever that source is.
So yeah, whatever that is, well, hopefully you know what that is. If you've been watching my channel, and you know that this is indeed not just something that, despite their disclaimers, absolutely would increase your potential to be influenced by things like 5G and the way that electromagnetism has been weaponized by the government, but also the spiritual realm itself, because these things are all hand in hand. And bottom line, if you hear nothing else that I'm saying, please just hear me in begging anyone who might be considering this, that do not put this stuff in your body. That's all I can say. That this is just Pharmakea being repackaged and rebranded and pushed back out to, the alternative medicine community, the truth community, those of us who, we recognize truths about how, yes, allopathic Rockefeller medicine is all based on pharmaceuticals and chemicals that are not found in nature but are made in a lab. And, I got to be honest, I'm not convinced that this is anything different. As much as they want to claim that it's found in nature, but then it comes from stars and it comes from algae, coal, and all this other really sketchy explanations. I think anyone with discernment should know that this is pretty dubious. But even if it was natural, quote unquote, if it does have these conductive properties, which it seems like it actually does, then this is not something you want to be putting in your body, especially when you're hearing people talking about how it's going to increase your psychic abilities, and their guests are remote viewers and they want to open up their third eye. And I mean, this should be apparent to anyone who understands the realities of the spiritual realm as the Bible describes, but also with this increased understanding that the whole consciousness field, this whole consciousness angle, with this increasing focus on vibrational energy and wavelengths and electromagnetism, it all just ties together. It really does. And so, as goofy as these kind of people might seem, and you might be tempted not to take it seriously at all, I actually do. I actually do think that there's something going on here, that they are messing with forces that they do not understand. And of course, it's just playing upon the legitimate desires of people who have seen the ill effects of pharmaceuticals and all that, and it really is exploiting all of that deception, the fallout. So it's the Hegelian dialectic type of thing, once again, where people reacting against one thing that's obviously bad, even in the mainstream. I mean, 10 years ago, to talk about how pharmaceuticals were poison, it, would be a far more fringy kind of thing to say than, and even now, I mean, even among people who are not into conspiracies or anything like that. I mean, there's definitely a vastly growing awareness of just the whole issue of health, and the population has just been medicated to death and all these problems. And so this just comes in and feeds off of that. And just like so many other ways that the New Age has completely infiltrated the truth movement and basically is driving the truth movement. And so yeah, it's pretty sobering, because people are just trying to find every way they can to tap into consciousness and increase their energy sensitivities. And in the end, you're just inviting in more demonic influence, whether it's through technologies that the government might be using, or just the spiritual realm that's all around us, and they're just looking for any way to increase that influence and increase that deception on the unsuspecting public. And in connection with that, if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend this new documentary that just came out from TruthStream Media. It's called The Minds of Men, and it just really goes through the whole history through the 20th century. And it really documents all kinds of stuff that the government, and through things like MKUltra and other programs that have been, that are undeniable fact that relate to all of this, and how this is really nothing new. All this consciousness research and finding ways to manipulate people by programming them electromagnetically, whether it's directly or indirectly. And it's pretty eye-opening. It's definitely very sobering information, and they did a phenomenal job with all the research and just the production overall. So The Minds of Men, can't recommend it enough, so check that out. And yes, please, please, if you have bought some of this stuff, if you are taking it, please stop. Stop reaching for panaceas, miracle cures. I'm not saying that supplements are bad. There are certain kinds of supplements that I think are actually pretty good, but they come from natural things that grow, that are plant-based and derived without weird processes. I mean, just the fact that it's used as a lubricant in machinery, if that alone doesn't tell you that you probably shouldn't be putting it in your body, then I can't stress it enough that this is some really dangerous stuff that a lot of people are getting involved with. So I just pray that you take a closer look at it and stop and think about what you're really doing if you're into this. So thanks for watching. God bless. Talk to you later.